Good evening, and welcome to How College Admission Really Works, a conversation about the college admission system with experts and best-selling authors Melissa Korn and Jeff Selingo. My name is Chris Gruber, and I'm the Vice President and Dean of Admission here at Davidson College, and I'm honored to have the chance to be with both Melissa and Jeff this evening. We would like to thank the Educational Studies Department who co-sponsored this evening's event. We hope that at the end of this evening's program, you're going to have a better sense of what college admission is, or maybe is not. I also hope that you will be vested with a few takeaways that come from our panelists that could be helpful when used as strategies, ideas, or a way to breathe and understand all of this. Melissa Korn writes about higher education for the Wall Street Journal. She moved to the Journal in 2011 to cover business education, workplace issues, and the college to career pathway. In her book, Unacceptable, Privilege, Deceit, and the Making of the College Admission Scandal, Melissa peeled back the layers of a scandal that rocked Hollywood, college athletics, and the public's faith in higher education, all at the same time. If the media coverage wasn't infuriating enough, Melissa's book, written with her colleague Jennifer Levitz, will take your outrage up a good level or two. The Washington Post, in a glowing review of the book, highlighted some of these astonishing scenes. One of a teenager who sits in his family's mansion and works on a draft of his college essay with a professional writer. His topic, the anguish of growing up poor. Another high school student, directed by his father, pretends to be a water polo player, posing awkwardly in the family swimming pool with a ball and swim cap, recently purchased on Amazon. And then there's the white son of college-educated parents whose college applications indicate that he is African-American, Mexican, and the first in his family to attend college. Jeff Selingo has written about higher education for more than 2 decades and is a New York Times best-selling author of 3 books. His latest is Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions. In this latest book, Jeff spent a year embedded in the admission offices of 3 very different institutions: the University of Washington in Seattle, Emory University in Atlanta, and here in Davidson College's admission office. A few observations Jeff made that may help guide you as you think of the admission process may include: 1, what Jeff recently said on CBS This Morning, that an acceptance or rejection by a college is not a judgment on your life. It is, in part, about a college's need for a balanced class. Their aim to create a heterogeneous community that, as much as possible, prepares students for a world that people from an array of backgrounds, for a world filled with people from an array of backgrounds and perspectives. Whereas in a second example, Jeff states that a single factor, such as an SAT or ACT, it's not a make or break. In the case of those tests, high school grades and courses often matter much more. This year, more than 400 plus colleges and universities, including Davidson, in a 3-year experiment, have gone test optional. And that brings our country to just under 1,700 4-year colleges and universities that will not require standardized testing for their fall entrance. For our audience this evening, please enter your questions by using the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and please send them to all participants. Please know that we will try to answer as many questions as possible. Jeff and Melissa, how far this industry has traveled in these last 30 years. And both of you touched on this in your books. Melissa, your book points to dates and events that perhaps instigated what happens in a hyper-competitive admission environment in which parents are dangerously invested in their kids' college choice. While Jeff's book looks at how the system has evolved, how it works, and perhaps doesn't work right now. So I ask, how did we get here? What was it? Did it come by way of US News and World Report, or direct mail, or the rise of the internet? A broader global awareness that came for higher education? Is it the Common App? The need for families to have some type of prestige or social media? And likely it's all of those things. But how do you both trace us to this point we're in today. And again, thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having us. This is going to be a fun evening, Chris. So I think, as you said, all of the above. There are a lot of reasons why we're in this moment of incredible anxiety and stress and uncertainty in college admissions right now, in higher ed broadly. I think in terms of what brought us to this moment on the admissions side, US News and World Report rankings did have a big role in shaping how families think about the college search process. The rankings, for those who don't know, started in the 1980s and pretty quickly kind of quantified some things about schools that hadn't really been quantified before, and therefore allowed families to say, I want to go to a school that's ranked in the top 20. I'm better than that person who's going to a school that's ranked in the top 50. And that became a kind of dangerous but very prevalent attitude among families, especially in certain communities where they knew a lot of people were applying to particular schools and not all of them would get in. It became quite competitive. So that was one big chunk. I would also say the financial crisis and kind of what happened since then also played a big role in kind of putting that all into hyperdrive. People who felt quite comfortable were afraid that their kids wouldn't be at that level anymore. And so access to admission to a particular school, a school with a particular reputation, really could kind of give them that boost that they felt they needed. And those who weren't already in the kind of the top 1%, top 5%, college education was really seen as the only path out of lower middle class or even middle class existence.
So I think there are three things that kind of led us to this point. One was what I call the nationalization and internationalization of higher education. Think about it. When my sister went to college in the mid 1980s, she still had to dial home on a payphone in the hallway after a certain time at night, because that's when the long distance rates went down, right? So to go away to college was a big deal, and so most kids went to college within a state or two. But with the rise of discount airlines and with the rise of technology that allows us to FaceTime our kids and text them like at all times a day now, going from Massachusetts to California doesn't seem like a big deal anymore. It's almost like going next door. And so as a result, what happened was, the smartest kids from Buffalo and from New York City and from Los Angeles, from wherever, started to get into the same pools across the country. And so we had this, and this happened around the world as well. The second thing was the Common App and the rise of technology. So, the Common App had been around since the 1970s, but starting in the late 1990s, it just took off with the rise of the internet. And now it's as easy to apply to college at some colleges as pressing a button. And so now, instead of applying to 2 or 3 colleges like I did in the early 1990s, students are applying to 8, 9, or 10, which just raises the application numbers everywhere. And then finally, and I think it really just keys off of something that Melissa just said, everyone's worried about their kids, and everyone's worried about opportunity for their kids in the future. And we think that opportunity is scarce. And we think that the only way to make sure that our kids, if we're middle class, upper middle class, whatever it might be, that our kids grow up in the same neighborhoods they're growing up now, is that you want to end up on the right side of the economic divide, and that means a college degree, but it really means a college degree from a highly selective college. Now, hopefully we'll get into this at some point. We don't really know what that buys us, except at a great place like Davidson, but we're never quite sure, and so we try to ensure it by making sure that our kids could go to the most selective place. And so I think all of these trends kind of have come together over the last 20, 30 years to get us to where we are today.
And we should say so much of this is focused on a very small sliver of the college universe, right? Most students attend colleges that admit most of their students. Jeff talks in his book about buyers and schools as buyers and sellers. There are so many universities and colleges out there that are fantastic schools that admit well over half of their applicants. This fierce competition is really for a couple dozen schools. Yet somehow that still kind of dominates the media and, my own writing as well.
Yeah, and I think that, both of you are typical. I would add that based on the outlets that you're working for, there are schools that you're going to typically tap for stories more so than others. And those are the schools that are often in the name of the press. So let's think about this time that we're living in, right now, and stick with this just for a second. So the admission process, it was stressful enough before the face masks and the class shifting to online and colleges shutting down tours and visitors and testing agencies canceling test dates. And then the pandemic, it upended the entire admission world, both for institutions and for students, and whether they're seniors and applicants or they're still in the midst of their high school careers. What do you see as the good that may have come from this disruption? And I know that, Jeff, I know that as you were preparing to release your book, you were thinking there was little good because I needed to address this before my book went out. But what do you see as the good that has come from this disruption? And has the pandemic actually improved college admission in any way? Knowing part of your summary, Jeff, within your book, what would you offer?
Probably two things. One is test optional, because I think that testing was a barrier to some students. And I think now that students may not see that as a barrier as much, at least this year. But maybe the bigger thing in the long run might be this inability for students to go to visit campuses. Now, maybe, Chris, people on your side of the desk might get nervous about that, but I actually think on the other side of the desk now, students aren't confined to, oh, we're going to do that tour through North Carolina, right? And we're going to see Chapel Hill and Davidson, right? Or we're going to take that tour through Chicago or Boston or wherever it might be. And now wherever you're sitting, you start to potentially look up and out and beyond that list of X number of schools that you could get to on spring break or the summer. By the way, knowing that also a lot of students are never able to make these tours anyway, right? That's the majority of students who never take these tours. But even for those students who do, that maybe now, because of the power of what we're doing now, that students might finally look at schools that are not on those usual tours during spring break or summer, and suddenly now discover a school that wasn't on their list originally.
I think that being able to, or not focusing on demonstrated interest by way of, did this person come to campus and sign the guest book or sign up for a campus tour or something. Yes, it does throw your life into a bit more disarray, Chris, perhaps, but it's harder to predict who's actually going to show up because you don't know who showed interest in the school. But as Jeff said, it really opens the door for students to think about more schools and for schools to think about more students, because they're not just focused on, okay, who could afford to come visit? And what Jeff said about test optional, it fascinated me when I was writing about the Varsity Blues case that it wasn't this scandal where a college counselor was paying off test site administrators, paying off test proctors, cheating on the, cheating and having students cheat on the SAT and ACT. That's not what brought this wave of test optional experiments. It was the pandemic. And, I'm glad that it happened. I'm really curious to see how schools that are doing this kind of as a 3-year trial or a 1-year trial, whether you keep it or where it goes from here, and you, meaning, Davidson is included. Because I think schools could potentially see that they're able to attract, admit, and enroll a very qualified class without looking at test scores.
So let me ask you, what's your fast answer to, all right, whether it's a 3-year trial or for others that have said, oh, we're doing it just for the year. Is the genie out of the bottle on test optional? It is. All right, well, that didn't take long because you both nodded your heads very, very quickly.
Hopefully nobody on the college board is on the call tonight. So.
Yeah, this will be recorded and we'll pass that on. So, Jeff, your book has the undergirding theme that many, many people view getting into college as a high stakes moment in life, as it's worth a lot. Melissa, your book shows that people in the most privileged corners of society think that admission is worth so much that they go to extraordinary lengths and many different lengths to bend the arc of possibilities. At the same time, there's a growing course in our nation that is saying that college isn't worth it. It's just too expensive. We know that some college grads are in jobs that don't require a degree, and others are in great careers and elected no for college. Where's the reality? What's the true intersection for these points?
Somewhere in the middle. I think, there it's perhaps a cop-out answer, but is a 4-year college degree right for everybody? Probably not. Is post-high school education important for everyone? Probably yes. No matter the industry, no matter where in the country you are. But there's so much research now that it's not just about where you go to college, it's how you go, right? It's what courses you're taking, how you're engaging with faculty and research and your classmates. And that's all changing right now as so many schools are still remote because of the pandemic. But overall, those factor in quite a bit beyond just what is the name that's on your resume. But still having a college, having an education section on your resume does matter.
Yeah, Chris, and I agree on that front. I mean, some sort of post-secondary education is absolutely necessary, I think, to just navigate the more complex world we live in now. And whether that's a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, in many cases, it may not, in some cases, it may not matter. I think skills are going to be more important. Experiences are going to be more important. And the ability to navigate, and this is where I'm a huge fan of liberal arts colleges like at Davidson, because I think this ability to navigate the ambiguity of a world that we're going to live in, where we have no idea what the jobs 5 years from now are going to be, or 10 years or 15 years from now. Unlike, I think, previous generations where jobs were fairly stable. And no matter what industry you went into, you could kind of probably make a career of that. That's not the true as much anymore. And I think this ability to kind of pivot constantly throughout your life is going to be key. And so this idea of being able to problem solve, work in teams, and just navigate this ambiguity of the world that we live in is important. And I think on that other front around selectivity, and I point this out very early in the book, I didn't grow up in, only half of my high school class even went to college. I didn't grow up in a place that talked about college constantly, as I think a lot as where I live now does, for example. And then I ended up also, Melissa and I went to college in the same town, just on 2 different hills. And so, she went to Cornell at a more selective, and I went to Ithaca College on the other hill. But you know what? I sit on the board at Ithaca now. My college roommate is anchor of ABC World News, as I talk about in the book. I sit on the board with CEOs of like J.Crew and other companies. And, so there's all these places out there. And this is the story, by the way, of hundreds, actually thousands of colleges out there. Just because you haven't heard of them doesn't mean they're not good. And every year, millions of people graduate from college and they go on to good jobs and great jobs. And they didn't necessarily graduate from the most selective places. And I think that's an important thing to remember. And I think especially for the parents out there, this is your son or daughter's college search. It's not your college search, right? So you might want to relive your college search and maybe just do it differently. But remember, this is going to be their college career and their life.
Jeff, I want to jump on then what you just said, and that is there are lots of these colleges and universities, many that you've never heard of. I've been working in this profession a long time, and as I travel to different parts of the country, I am always running into a new place that I've never heard of. And then when you do some research, you immediately realize, wow, that's the place to go to if you're interested in X or Y. So what's the advice that you would offer to parents, to students, in order to broaden their search so they can have an understanding of this vast array of places that exists out there? So what are your experiences in terms of how do you find these places? What would you suggest?
There's one piece of advice, and somebody pointed out in the chat around something that I tweeted out today from a professor at Lehigh University. And I highly suggest if you're on Twitter, you could go and find this little tweet thread that he had around seniors that he had talked about in his class today. But anyway, I think there's a point embedded in that I always tell people that when you ask successful graduates about their college career, what they're most going to talk about are people. They're not going to talk about something they learned in a class, but they're going to talk about people. They're going to talk about faculty members, staff, coaches, mentors really is really what you're thinking about. And you want to go to a place, and this is the part you're going to probably ask me, well, how do you find that, right? But you want to go to a place where you're going to be taught by great faculty members, where you're going to have the experience of getting to know faculty members, whether maybe you're an athlete and with coaches or other mentors. Because at the end, and this is backed up by Gallup research, we know this, that those graduates who have met somebody in college or met many people in college that kind of encouraged them to pursue their dreams, that challenged some of their belief systems coming into college, those are the things that are going to help you grow and have success in life. And that, to me, more than does it offer a specific major, does it, because 30% of students, according to the education department, change their major anyway. Is it a big sports school, or is it in a specific location? There's all these other things that at the end don't matter as much as the people, the classmates, the faculty, the staff.
As for how you find those schools, I really wish there was some version, and maybe there is, that I just don't know about, kind of like Netflix. You watched this, you liked this, here's a few other recommendations for you. Because there are so many schools that would fit into the vein of small to mid-sized liberal arts school, not in a huge city, not in the middle of nowhere, that have particular strengths in these programs, or, their student newspaper is just top notch, or, big rah-rah attitude atmosphere. And your college counselor in your high school can help with that to some extent, if you're lucky enough to go to a school where your college counselor even knows who you are. But at so many high schools, that's just not the case. And they're not just dedicated to college counseling, but overall guidance counseling. The ratios of student to counselor are pretty abysmal in much of the country. And, not everybody can or afford to or wants to hire a private counselor. So one suggestion I have is not just looking at, so every high school has kind of a school profile, and many on their websites will list, here's where some of our recent grads went to college. Don't look at the ones that are, here are the usual suspects. Sometimes they'll highlight, on the main college advising website have, 6 or 7 schools. They'll name whichever Ivies anyone's gone to, and a handful of others, maybe a few local state schools. Look at the full list. See where everyone in the prior class, the prior 5 years went. And if there's a school you haven't heard of, look it up. And that's just, I'm still coming across schools that I had never heard of before. Chris, you said that you do occasionally. There are so many out there, and no one's going to give you a list of them, unfortunately. So much of it is you having to search for them.
As you guys can see as well by way of the chat, lots of questions on test optional and different variations, obviously, on that theme. Is it really optional? But in addition to, do you believe that there are going to be some groups of students that are going to be more favored by way of submitting or not submitting a test? What are some of the underlying issues that you see as true folks that understand this market? What's going to come with this? What should folks be aware of? Is there an untold story that you think exists here?
The language around how a school is describing their test optional policy, I think, is really important to look at. Are they saying, we're test blind, or we're test optional, or we're test optional in certain circumstances, or we're test optional, but if you had a testing center open within 100 miles, you better be submitting that score. And so, schools are all over the map on that. There's, a lot of jokes on Twitter about all the different, test questioning, test optional, test I'm not sure what. And I think looking at that language is a good first step. There probably are some schools that, even if they're not as explicit about it, do expect certain students to be taking the test. Not necessarily students in COVID hotspots when the test was offered, where there was no testing center. But if there was a testing center nearby, a lot of schools may expect to see you submit some scores. They won't require it, but they may like to see it.
But Melissa, let me push you on this. Do you believe there are any geographical biases that go with this? Let's think of the I-95 corridor. The rules that are in place up north on that corridor versus those places that are much further south, those rules are not the same. Stay in place. Test centers canceling test scores. So the expectation that perhaps a New England school is going to say, I'd expect you to find that test versus perhaps a more southern place looking to find those, and I would say it's going to be south of here. Are those differences by way of geography being understood? Because let's face it, some places are open for business right now, and some places in this country are not. Plain and simply, they're not. So how can we have different expectations of what students would or would not be doing right now? And I would trust that colleges would have to be explicit about saying, you better do this. What do you think?
So here's the example is Florida. Florida's public universities are still requiring that applicants submit standardized test scores. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but a number of test centers have canceled their test administration for the December testing. Like, this is just not happening. It is just not possible for these kids to take tests, yet the school is still requiring it. So yes, the state is open in many ways. Disney is open, but the testing centers are not open, and not everyone has the means to go drive to Georgia or one of the Carolinas or Louisiana or anywhere to go find a place to take the test.
Yeah, Chris, first of all, you're the expert on this, so I would love to know what your thought on this is. But Melissa just mentioned Florida, and 24 centers have closed for the December 5th SAT, right? So, even if the assumption is somewhere else, like, well, they're from Florida, that place is open, so they must be able to take a test. I don't think most institutions are going to assume that necessarily. And I've been surprised. I've been casually polling people, Chris, in your job. And I said, so in your early applications, what percentage of your applications are coming with test scores? And I expected, well, when I talked to some of these same folks a couple months ago, they expected maybe half would come. The numbers I'm getting are shockingly low. They're more like 20, 25, 30%. At some of the highly selected places I've been asking, they're in the low 30s so far. Well, I understand in any other year, if you're a parent or a student and you're hearing about a test optional school where 85 or 90% of the applications come with test scores, I get why you would want to submit a test score. I get it, right? Because so many other students are coming with test scores, and you're going to feel like, well, if I don't submit a test score, they're going to assume that it's low. But when only 30% or 35% so far, and I'm not quite sure it's going to get that much better, given what I just said about Florida, you can't pick a class based on essentially just 30% of the applicant pool coming with test scores. So I really do think, for once, and I don't think admissions offices are always that transparent, but I think in this case, when they say test optional, I think they really do mean test optional.
I will say, even for the schools where 85, 90% of applicants are still submitting scores, even if they don't have to, as Jeff points out in his book very clearly, and I think maybe perhaps some of the parents in the Varsity Blues scandal didn't quite understand, right? A test score alone is not going to get you in. A test score alone is also not going to get you rejected. It is in the context of everything else. And Chris, you can talk at length about holistic admissions, but whether it's a 1410 or a 1490 or a 1010 or a 1090 on the SAT or a 25 or a 31 on the ACT, that is not going to make or break your application.
Melissa, I agree, and it echoes what you've both said to this point. When we have been together as a college community and we welcome our first year class, I think most students fix in their mind, I bet you the one reason that I was admitted here was because of X. And it's not just because of that one reason, it's a variety of different reasons. And some of it could be something that was embedded within the clever way in which you presented your application, or it could be what somebody has said about you, or the cohort of things that you have done. But you're right, it's not one thing alone that works in a positive or works in a less than positive way. And I think the last thing I want to just include on this testing is beyond geography, there is opportunity that exists in some schools for students to be taking examinations by way of the school having the resources to offer their on-campus testing, and some schools cannot. And it's not necessarily a sole function of public versus private, though it is skewed more to the privates. But we are seeing some great differences with that as well. Our early decision deadline date fell yesterday on the 15th. So we will understand, Jeff, those percentages that you have just quoted, very shortly as we go into our review period. But I originally thought, and as you were asking me, I had this conversation with you. I was walking around the beach and you were talking to me about this and you're saying, what do you think is going to come? And I originally thought it might be around 50%, but Jeff, that was August, and now we're in November and we're not in a better place by way of opening in a large way of yet. Melissa, I want to come back to your book for a second, and it's going to be a play on the title, but is there a time and place where unacceptable behavior goes away? Is there a system that could ever be developed where we are able to moderate or do away with some of these results and actions that you have shared?
Moderate, yes. Do away with, I don't think so. I'm such a Debbie Downer here, but
I
no,
think you're being real. I think you're being real.
as long as an admission letter or an admission email these days is something that is coveted, people will find a way to cut corners to obtain that. It could, it may still be with some sort of test cheating scheme. It may be with fudging or entirely making up your athletic prowess. It may be people who write about dramatic events in their life when that didn't actually happen, or people who check certain boxes on race and ethnicity because they know that the colleges and universities aren't checking up on that, right? They're not going to call and say, prove to me that you are whatever you just marked down. So there's always going to be ways that people are trying to game the system. This scandal, these criminal charges and arrests and sentences and guilty pleas and trials that'll happen next year, that might kind of put the kibosh on certain paths, but there are always going to be other ones. Someone will always find a new route. I mean, even after the scandal broke and a number of parents have pleaded guilty, my colleague at the Journal, Doug Belkin, and ProPublica kind of separately wrote about this woman in the Chicago suburbs who was encouraging parents to give up guardianship of their kids so that the kids could get more financial aid to University of Illinois. And I mean, again, not technically illegal, but questionable.
Yeah. Jeff, let me reframe the question just a little bit. One of the things of your call outs at the end of your most recent book is the request for colleges and universities to only ask for information that you're truly going to use. In light of the scandal, do you see anything here whereby there's a parallel, and would we change anything that perhaps eliminates some of what Melissa has uncovered within her book and shared?
Yeah, and we might, Chris, as I point out, and this is very true at the process that I saw at Davidson, but as well as everywhere else. I mean, people always ask me for a formula. What does it take to get in? And especially this year without test scores. Well, because parents and students have always been in love with the tests more than I think admissions officers have been. And so everybody thinks, well, what is it going to be that gets me in this year? And it's, as we've said, it's not one thing. But the first things that, people in your position look at are high school courses and grades, because that's really what at most of these places, especially these selective colleges, we know it's what really portends success at these institutions. It's what gets you through, and it's what gets you to graduation. And so high school curriculum and grades, we know this year for the most part are going to be there. Yeah, it's maybe grades from last spring might not be, but for the most part, you were able to take those classes. Sorry. So then the question I think becomes this year is, what else without test scores are you going to lean into more? And I think maybe out of that process, people might say, you know what, we don't necessarily need to look at all these extracurricular activities, or we don't necessarily need all these supplemental essays, or maybe we don't need to ask for all these recommendations, or whatever it might be. My hope is that because almost every institution out there has to, for the first time in a while, really rethink their review process without test scores, and potentially with a lot of other things out there missing in the application, or some things missing out of the application. My hope is at the end of the year, they say, you know what, we recruited a class, we enrolled a class without all these usual assets. Maybe now we can stop asking for some of them. And that is my hope. Somebody is asking about the class of 2022. That's my hope for the class of 2022 and beyond, that we learn a lot during the review process this year.
And then rankings have gone away, right? Did I hear you say that at the end of your sentence, Jeff? Did I hear that? So when are we going to have an understanding as to what is the new norm? When do you think that's going to be defined? Relative to, the things that we're judged on are what? It's what are our application numbers? What is our admit rate? What is our yield rate? What's our retention rate? What is? New norms are going to be defined, Jeff. You've just said it, and let's hope that colleges have comfort in those, and that, as it looks for us to be evaluated by outside organizations, maybe they're going to need to change everything as well, because they're going to need to define new norms. But when do you see these new norms coming in? Would you fixate on anything that isn't obvious in defining that new norm?
I'll jump in here.
So,
college rankings, many of them, not all, but many of them do focus a lot on inputs. So, the data, the stats about the applicant pool and the admitted class, how selective was the school, all of that stuff. And the selectivity doesn't count for as much as people think it does in rankings generally, but it's still something people pay attention to. What should be is kind of what happens when students are actually in school. So retention rates, graduation rates for particular populations. That overall graduation rate isn't as meaningful as if you're a Pell eligible student. What is the graduation rate for Pell students? What kind of support do they give first gen college students? Things like that. I do think there's more conversation about those things now than there was 5 years ago. And that's really encouraging. But in terms of making that the new norm, I do think we're still a ways away from that. And we will remain a ways away from that until colleges stop putting out press releases announcing how selective they were and boasting about that as a measure of their quality, or, pat themselves on the back for rejecting so many people. And until high schools stop focusing on a few brand names as well as kind of the success stories for their college class, or for their senior class.
Yeah, Chris, just briefly, I think that admissions may be a lagging piece of this, because I think the new norms we're going to start to see in colleges themselves. If we're back in normal way next fall, for example, I could imagine starting to see new ways of thinking about the undergraduate pathway. So, we've seen new calendars emerge this year, for example, right? So this idea that maybe not everybody needs to be on campus for 15 weeks every fall and 15 weeks in the spring. We might see, especially in the name of affordability, we might see and getting hands-on experience. We might see more ideas around low residency options, right? Where students could maybe be on campus for half the semester, and then they could go, if they want to do study abroad, or they want to do an internship for the other half, or they want to work to earn money. We might see different ways of getting the degree. It may be more of a 3-year degree, a more 2+2, again, in the name of affordability, where students start at community colleges. So I might imagine, especially for these colleges that really need, that are not the most elite and don't have and aren't sitting on piles of money, I would imagine that they're going to break away from the herd a little bit and start to try new things. As a result, we might see changes in the marketplace by people who that appeals to, right? This idea that, hey, maybe I want to try this low residency option, or maybe I want to try this 2+2, or whatever it might be. And then 5, 10 years from now, we might see a movement in not what we necessarily think of the top colleges, but that middle tier of colleges that are always trying to be somebody else that they're not. And that is where I think we're going to see the biggest changes in higher ed over the next 10 years.
Thank you. Let's jump to a question from a student. So we're pivoting just a little bit, but you've talked a little bit about how many factors there are in the college admission process: tests, essays, grades, etc. I guess one of my biggest questions about the process is, what do you think we should be doing right now in high school to make our applications more successful and stand out more in the years to come?
I really love this question. And the answer is pretty simple. It's follow your passions, do things that you're excited about. That comes through in an essay about your extracurriculars. That comes through in the amount of time you spend doing those activities, right? If you are really passionate about journalism, say, not speaking personally or anything, did you work your way up through the student newspaper? Did you have not an internship necessarily, but did you go shadow somebody at your local paper? Did you, take classes if your high school offered any journalism or communications classes or mass media classes? You don't have to do every single one of those things, but if journalism is your passion, you want to do those things, and that comes through. Faking it comes through as well. So if you think you need to check all of these boxes and do all of these activities, and because that's what some guidance counselor told you, or that's what you thought some college wants to see, that's not what they want to see. There's discussion about being well-rounded and being pointy, and I always love this idea that a lot of schools aren't looking for somebody who does lots of everything, because that means that they can't commit to something, don't have a passion, haven't found who they are. Not that you need to know exactly who you are at age 17, but at least show that you're thinking about that. So if you're pointy, you excel in one area, you're fine in the other areas, but you've really kind of latched on to one particular subject, a particular theme, a particular cause, that sort of thing. And ironically, Rick Singer, the center of the mastermind of the admissions scandal, he was really big on branding and making all of his clients have a brand. And he went a little extra far with some of those, but he wasn't wrong in saying, who are you and what version of you do you want to be presenting to the school? But you have to be able to figure out the who are you part and what you actually want to be doing before you can package it.
I think Melissa's last point there is right on, Chris. It's this idea of who are you and what's the story you want to tell to Davidson, which is a different story than you're going to tell to Emory, which is a different story than you're going to tell to NYU, whatever. I mean, I mentioned this in the book. In the race to apply to 8 or 10 colleges, we just put them all in one big Google Doc and we're cutting and pasting. And we're not really, these colleges most of the time have 8, 10, 12, 15 minutes to really think about some of these students and what's the story you want them to know about you. That's what I think you should be focusing on this fall as you think about each of these institutions. Also, there are a lot of things out of your control this fall because of the pandemic. I get it. But there are a lot of things in your control, especially the grades that you're getting in your senior year, which are probably even more important this year than in many other years because of the lack of the SAT. And then the final piece on this is that most colleges want to know, are you going to come here and just kind of go through the motions and then just get that degree at the end and move on? Or are you going to come here and participate, actively engage, maybe have your mind changed, right? This idea of a growth mindset and how you express that, right? That college, that high school has not just been a series of checking off boxes, right? That you just put 10 activities down because you knew you had to fill out those 10 spots on the Common App, but that you really put your mind to something. And maybe even during the pandemic, your mind changed about things and you try new things, right? The more that you can show that you're not done, right? That you haven't peaked, that there's more to do, and that you want to do it at Davidson. And the more you can show that through your application, the more I think you're going to be successful.
The dean in me forces me to add to what both of you have said, and that is going to be, you don't want to be doing anything on a transactional basis. We joke and as I've had the good fortune to give talks around the country, I said, somehow this conversation came up in your house at some point, and that is going to be, hey, there's an event taking place down on the town green on Saturday, and it's a volunteer opportunity. You should go and do that because colleges like that kind of stuff. No, you don't want to go and do that unless that's truly something that you want to be doing. So nothing for the transactional basis. The second thing is, you're right, there's no formula. There's no formula of we're looking for 2 parts volunteer, 3 parts athletics, 1 part art, 3 parts you have found your own nonprofit. It is not that. Also appreciating that there are some students who have roles that are defined for them because of their families and the role that they have within that family as well.
On that point, Chris, I would just say, I think a lot of applicants, a lot of students don't really know what to do with the fact that they maybe, help out 20 hours a week at their family's store or restaurant or things like that. They don't realize that that is a part of your application, that is a part of who you are, and that shows so much about you, even if it doesn't, it's not, the club at your high school. So those students who are in that position, you shouldn't be discounting that or assuming that a college doesn't want to know about it.
Jeff, you also, as you were finishing up that last question, you were saying, as a college university is looking at you and you get 6, 8, 10, 12 minutes. Obviously, you're getting into some of the things that you've spoken about within your book, getting into committee-based evaluation. And as volume has grown at a number of colleges and universities, there's a set amount of time that some committees are going to give. In light of you having observed at some places, not at Davidson, these types of, did I get that in? I think I just slipped that in there, didn't I? That we do not use committee-based evaluation. Is there anything that you would suggest, or Melissa, that you would suggest for those schools that are using that in order to capture the attention and to jump back to our students' question of what could we be doing now, or what can we do to be prepared for this and with our applications?
Yeah, I mean, I know, Chris, I don't think you're a fan of committee-based evaluation, which is
Did I make that clear?
Yes, which I know Melissa has written about for the journal, and Emory follows, and I describe in the book, which is really essentially splitting the application in half. Instead of having a solo reader that first time, 2 readers are approaching it, and they are able to move through it more quickly. I don't think there's anything really different that you should do, except to know, and this is true whether it's a single reader or committee-based evaluation, is that admissions officers aren't detectives, and they're not there to catch problems, as Melissa talked about, right? That's how things that she describes in her book could get through, because they're not out there checking all these things. But also that unless you tell them, they're not going to really know, right? So I think there's an example actually in the book from Davidson about, Melissa mentioned work, right? Helping out, right? If you're working, don't just say, well, I worked at this job for this many hours. Like, the more you can tell, if you think that's important, and by the way, work is important, the more you can tell about these activities. Don't assume that somebody on the other side of the desk knows all this stuff, because they're not detectives. And I think that, again, goes back to this idea of what is the story that you want to tell, whether it's 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it might be, that you want to tell those admissions officers.
Jeff, I love what you said. And a lovely example that we had a couple of years ago that still just resonates in my mind. The student was on the swim team, and the student on the swim team did it because he wanted to get in shape for another sport. And what did, in this case, he love about that? Well, he loved the fact that it was a co-ed team. He loved the condition that he got himself into. He loved the solitude of it. And that was all explained under the heading of swimming. So think of all the things that we learned about the student as a result of that one thing. I am respectful of time, knowing that we've got just about 9 minutes to go, and I'm gonna let you get on. But I'd love to ask both of you, in your research, can you share with us an honest moment, an unexpected answer, a twist in the story, or something that took you off guard and you were like, come on, you're both writers, you're both journalists, I know you wrote it down at the time, but, what can you share that really was surprising to you?
I'll start. I'll give Melissa time. I think the thing that I wasn't expecting, and this is not to depress people or to get them more anxious, but the depth and breadth of these pools, I don't think you quite appreciate. And so we'd be sitting there and you would look at this application, you'd be like, this person's great. Right. And I was in rooms where students with, 1,500 plus on their SAT and 4.0 plus GPAs were denied admission, right? And so because there were 5 other applications just like that person, right? And so I think this goes back to just a reality check on your overall list. And I think somebody brought this up in terms of test optional this year. Now everybody thinks, well, now I'm going to apply to whatever school because they don't require testing this year, and I could get in. There are still all these other things they're going to be looking at, and I think that we don't really appreciate that. Yes, you might be great at your high school, but now just apply that tens of thousands of times over across the country. And again, it's not to make you anxious. It's not to say don't have those reach schools, but also have schools that you're going to fall in love with, that you are pretty assured you're going to be able to get in. Because the last thing you want to be is sitting there in March and April next year and have like 1 or 2 choices that you really don't love because somebody made you put those schools on your list back in the fall, and you just placated somebody by putting them on your list, but you never really were in love with them. Having that balanced list, I think, is really critical.
I'll kind of piggyback off of that, what Jeff said about, placating somebody and adding a school on your list just to get them off your back, or, make them happy, it's dad's alma mater or something like that. I think something that really surprised me in reporting out Unacceptable and in my general coverage of college admissions, the letters, the emails I get from readers very regularly, it still surprises me how much parents judge themselves based on where their kids go. That it is this, badge of honor, the sign of I'm a good parent because my kid went here. And kind of directing the whole process so that they get to that end goal they want. One of the judges in the Varsity Blues case asked parents, because a bunch of parents were being sentenced, and over they kept saying, I was trying to do what was best for my kid. And at one point she interrupted and said, are you sure about that? Are you doing what's best for your kid, or what you thought was best for you because of the bragging rights you got to say that your kid went to USC or Georgetown or wherever it was? And I think that is troubling. Maybe it shouldn't surprise me, but it does, because I want to think that kids can drive this process a little bit more, and parents can back off a little bit in terms of some of those discussions, and just listen to what their kids are telling them.
Help us debunk one of the largest myths of this year, because I don't think those of us trying to do so on the college side are being heard. Are you both familiar that the class of 2025, the college class of 2025, is already full because of the fact that everyone has deferred their admission or their enrollment for a year and taken a gap year? What are you hearing about this? And obviously gap years are a much bigger thing as you go up into the Mid-Atlantic and the New England area. But is the class of 2025, the college class of 2025, full? And are there going to be places for our current seniors in high school and then juniors in high school? Will you please put their minds at ease?
The classes are not full. Many students at certain schools did decide to defer their enrollment, who they would have started this fall. They deferred their enrollment possibly just to this spring. So there'll still be members of the class of 2024. Some did defer till next fall. Many of them will never show up at that school anyway. Some schools are expanding their classes to accommodate this. Some schools are, not quite sure what it'll mean for them yet. But the fact that this year's freshman class is smaller, I'm pulling a line from Jeff here, but the schools still need to have an overall student body that's relatively flat. So if what will be next year's sophomore class is small, next year's freshman class might try to make up some of that difference.
Very true. I mean, most colleges care about overall enrollment, and they're not going to want to have this class that now will transition through the next 4 years, or 3 years, I guess it will be by that time, that's going to be much smaller. So this is an overblown worry. Maybe at some schools, somebody told me, I probably shouldn't quote this, but somebody said that Duke has announced recently that they are going to accept fewer students as a result of this. I don't know how true that is, so I probably should be a better journalist than that and just not say that. But anyway, I think that you need to check with the schools that you might be applying to, and maybe they've said something about this.
Yeah, but don't try to do the math on your own.
Yeah.
Like it's a fool's errand.
Absolutely. As we look to sign off in a couple of seconds here, in a couple of minutes here, is there one little nugget that you would offer to parent as an advice, to a student as advice as they navigate this college selection world?
I'll give some advice to a student, and that's even if you end up not getting into your top choice school, you will survive, even though it might not feel like that in March or December or whenever you get your decision. I did not get into my first choice school, and I was absolutely devastated for quite a while, and then realized the place I ended up was much better for me anyway.
As I say in the book, college is a stopping point, one of many stopping points in life. But it's not the only one, and you're going to have many moments in your life where you're going to have like that proverbial fork in the road. And so don't put this in context with the rest of your life. It is not, the decision you make now is not going to set you up for everything else that you're going to do in life. You're going to have many more opportunities than just this quote unquote one that you have now.
And I can't resist, and that's going to be students. Before you start to make your list of colleges and universities, I ask that you make your list of needs. What are the things that you most want to find in a college or university to make you whole? What do you want different from your high school experience? What do you want to take with you? And once you have that list of what you're hoping to find, then start to build your true list. So with that said, I want to thank Melissa and Jeff. Thank you so very, very much for joining us this evening. Melissa Korn is the author of Unacceptable: Privilege, Deceit, and the Making of the College Admission Scandal. And in the chat, we are posting a link there so you can have access to pick up Melissa's book. And she would encourage you to find it at a bookstore that is near and dear to you, and hopefully your local spot. Jeff Selingo, his latest book is Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions. And you can go to Jeff's website, jeffselingo.com/purchase in order to pick up a copy of that. To all of you who have joined us this evening, thank you. I hope you have enjoyed our hour with Melissa and Jeff, and you did find at least one takeaway that might serve you well in the future. From all of us here at Davidson, we wish you a good evening. Good night.